Hello and welcome back, and in this video we are going to be creating our to-do list table view cell. So to-do table view cell. So if you look at our example or draft app, we basically have two types of rows or table view cells. One is the summary cell, which is always going to be a single cell. And then you have basically a repeating cell, which basically displays the information about your task that needs to be done. And basically this is iterative in nature. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to build out this cell first, and then after that we're going to build this summary cell out. And if I mark this item to be completed again after marking it incomplete, the next thing that we're going to tackle on is the dependency injection using Swift package manager to basically manage our dependencies for Lottie animation. So, and we're also going to create basically a view. So there are three views that are going to go inside our views folder, and in this video we're going to start with the first one, which is called to-do list, to-do table view cell. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with that one. And we're simply going to select Cocoa Touch class in new file template, click next. Our subclass is basically going to be called table view or UI table view cell. So UI table view cell. Okay, and we are simply going to add to do, or you can name it to do, or you can name it task. I'm gonna name it to do table view cell. Okay, the language is gonna be Swift, and we're gonna click next and create this inside our views folder. Okay, now there are some default functions that are added by Xcode away from nib. Is basically whether you're creating this cell using interface builder or using nib or zip files, or when you're creating your view using storyboard. In those cases, this function is going to be called. We don't need this, so we're just going to simply get rid of it. And set selected is another one. Basically, if you want to override the state of set selected, then you can configure those. We don't need this one either, so we're gonna simply, both of these functions, if you look at, they are override of the existing UI view cell implementation, so we can simply get rid of these. And if we build, everything should still build. Okay, now we're going to basically initialize or create our view programmatically. So let's go ahead and start by creating some of the controls that we're going to need. So first control that we're going to need is going to be a UI label. And this is basically going to be displaying the task name. Okay, so that's why task name label. Let's go ahead and create a view, and this is an internal property. That's why I'm actually naming it as V. And if you want to find out basically what this view is all about, its main name, property name, which is the lazyvar property name, is the name that's representing the view type. So this is fine for convenience, because we have, like, the main name being called out here, and scope for this code is very limited within this block only, so we should be okay. All right, v dot translate, let's make sure that our auto resizing mask is set to false. That's the first thing we always do. And then we're gonna set the font for this guy, and we're gonna say UI font, use the system font of size 16 and make it bold. Okay, now you want to make sure that we actually show multiple lines for the task name. So if I go back into our demo app, and let's go ahead and add a really long name of task for which this cell should wrap and display multiple lines. Okay, and we're gonna mark this to be completed on some date in future. And notice that this one is basically wrapping inside multiple lines. So basically it's not hiding or showing an ellipsis when the line reaches more than the character allowed for the width. It basically wraps itself. So that's what we are saying here. We are saying number of lines for the UI label is going to be 0. By setting 0, basically what you're making sure that UIKit, or like your compiler or your runtime actually takes over and expands this UI label as much as possible to accommodate the need for your text. Okay, so it's gonna grow to unlimited size. That's what this 0 means. Now if you want to restrict it to just single line or 2 line or 3 line, you can actually set that value, or you can set 0 to basically let it grow based on the need of the text that is passed in. All right, next thing is we want to make sure that we define the line breaking rule. So whenever the line is breaking, essentially like this line is breaking right here, how do you want to break our text string? Okay, do we want to break it by word, or basically displaying this CE can fit here, so CE-LL should, or should we break it by word itself? So if next word cannot be fitted in this space, we should actually wrap and start the new line. And that's what we're going to do. And basically line break mode is an enum that has multiple properties. So it has by character wrapping, clipping, truncating head, truncating middle, truncating tail. By word wrapping, essentially check if the word can fit in. If it cannot, start a new line. Okay, that's what this property does. Okay, now next up we're gonna create our next label, and this label is basically going to show due or completed date. Actually due or completed dates. Yes. So basically we're gonna call this one, and it's this guy right here, and we're gonna call this one lazy var due or completed label. And since this label is going to be a conditional label, whenever a task is marked as completed, we want to basically show that tasks. If it's marked completed, then we want to show the completed date. If it's not completed yet, then we want to show the due date. Okay, so we want to basically create our label, and we want to make sure that we return the let's go ahead and command I to format everything, and or control I actually to format, and then we're gonna make sure that our auto resizing mask is marked as false, and the font is UI font dot system font of size 14. Okay, so that's basically our due on label. Now our completed label is going to be same, so I'm going to simply create and make a copy of this and basically name this as completed label, which is going to display the text whether it's the task is completed or not. Okay, so it changes from completed to incompleted to complete, incomplete to or not completed to completed state. Okay, so basically it's this text is also dynamic or conditional in nature. Okay, now next up we want to set this all these views up by setting the views and by setting its constraints. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to create or override the init. The init that we want to override is the one that takes a style and a reuse identifier. Now, reuse identifier in table views, as you might already know, is used to basically efficiently render your table with a large number of items. So reuse identifier is basically passed to the cell, and we want to make sure that we actually pass it to its super class by calling super.init, the style that we want to display, and the reuse identifier that we got. Okay, so that way, like the build system or the runtime would know what the reuse identifier is, and it can basically start reusing this particular cell. Now we need two functions: setup view, okay, and setup constraints. Okay, setup constraints we're going to call inside the setup view. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, Xcode is complaining that there is a required initializer that we need to create, and we're going to basically, first let's create that. Now this initializer, we don't need to define anything because this type of initializer is called from storyboard or Xaber files, basically interface builder. And since we are not using interface builder, this code will never be called, so we are safe. Okay, now we're going to create our function setup view, actually setup view. Okay, and we're going to create our function for setup constraints as well. Okay, last item on the setup view is going to be setup constraints. So let's go ahead and make sure we call that. And now we are ready to basically set up our view. Okay, so the way we're going to do it is by first setting the selection style. So basically what happens by default, whenever you create a table view with table view cell, the cell is selectable, and it shows the selection by putting basically a secondary color selection highlight. Okay, we want to disable that. We don't want to show any selection, so we're going to simply say selection style and mark it as none. Now other values are blue, default, gray. We're gonna mark it none. We don't want, like, the selection to show up because we are not basically writing an app that actually displays the detail about it. All the details that need to be displayed are displayed onto the cell itself. Next thing we're going to do is we are going to basically add our subviews to the content view. So your table view cell contains a view called content view, which is responsible for displaying all the content. Okay, so we don't want to add the subviews directly, although we can do it. The best practice is to add it inside the content view, which is the view which is placed for you inside the cell. Okay, so we're going to simply say content view dot add subview, and we're going to add task name label. Let's go ahead and add subview and due or completed label, content view dot add subview completed table. Okay, so reason I wanted to add all the views like this, and reason I did not use basically the other technique where we were creating an array of controls and doing a for each, because this is another way to do it. Okay, I just wanted to show you, like, all the variations that are available for you to choose from, and there is nothing wrong in either or approaches, so you can use whichever you want. Next is setup constraints. So basically we want to set all the constraints. So let's go ahead and create our ns layout constraint object and activate constraints that are given in this array or that are defined inside this array. So first start with task name label, and we want to add its top anchor and constrain it to the content view's top anchor. And let's give it a constant of 8 points. Next, we're gonna add a leading anchor and constrain that to content view dot leading anchor, and we're going to constrain this 16 points. Okay, and you can choose 8 or 16, whichever. I think I want to give a little bit more breathing room and leading and trailing space. I'm going to copy the previous constraint, and we're going to set the same for trailing, except that we're going to change the constant to -16, so we actually pull it back inside. So if you add a +16, the view subview is going to extend beyond the safe area, your safe area layout guide. Okay, now this is all of our task name labels. Okay, next is due or not, a due or completed label. So we're going to constrain its top constraint to the task name label. Okay, and we're going to add a constant of 16 points. So our next label, which is due or completed label, which is this guy right here. This is going to be constrained basically the bottom of the label, the task name label, and there's going to be a constant between them of 16 points. So you're going to say task name dot bottom anchor and 16 points of gap between them. Okay, then we're going to basically create our due or completed labels leading anchor, and we're going to align it to our task name leading anchor. And then we're going to basically have a bottom anchor. So if you look at this component right here, it needs a leading because we want to basically align it to the leading of the label, but it doesn't need a trailing because the trailing is, we know that it's going to grow up until here at max, and this property is not that big, so we can actually leave it unconstrained and it can grow basically as much as it wants. We're gonna basically have this aligned with the trailing, that way both of these are basically on the same line. Okay, you can change that constraint based on your need and try to experiment with other constraints as well while we are doing all these programmatic constraints. Okay, let's go ahead and add a due or completed label dot bottom anchor, and we're gonna constrain the bottom to the content views bottom anchor, and we're gonna give it a constant of -8. So basically what we are saying is the label is gonna handle the top anchor and this the name label, and the completed label or due on label is going to take care of the bottom one. In total, what we want is we want the all the views combined to have basically a constraint system that can define how much this entire view needs collectively, including its child views, for leading, top, trailing, and bottom. If you have any of these missing, we are going to basically get a layout warning inside our console output whenever this view is laid out, and there can be some differences of UI, the way you want it to build. It's not going to appear that way because then runtime takes over and basically tries to define its own constraints. Okay, so we want to avoid basically all these surprises by making sure that all subviews have collectively satisfied the requirement of having leading, trailing, top and bottom constraints. Okay, let's go ahead and move on, and we are going to add our completed label. This is going to once again align its top anchor to the task name label bottom anchor. And we are going to create the constant of 16. This way our due or completed label and completed label are perfectly aligned. Then we're gonna create our trailing anchor, which is going to be same as task name label dot trailing anchor. So here for the due or completed, we are actually aligning it to the leading side, and the completed or not completed to the trailing side of the anchor. Okay, then we're going to basically have our completed label dot bottom anchor, and we're going to constrain that to content view dot bottom anchor and constant of -8. Okay, now there's one more constraint that we need. We want to make sure that our task label can grow basically as much as possible, and when it is growing, our cell can grow at the same time. Okay, so this next constraint is going to basically say that the bottom anchor of the content view is going to be constrained with the constraint greater than or equal to, and we're going to say task name label dot bottom anchor. So whatever task name labels bottom anchor is, and a constant of 8 points. Okay, so it's going to basically continue to grow as the task name label grows. That way our cell is always displaying the complete content without any constraint issues. Okay, so these are all the constraints that we need basically to set up our view. Now there's one more function I want to create before we actually wrap up this video, and this function is basically going to be called by the table view itself, passing on a model that we can use to configure our cell. So we're going to call this configure, and this will take a task view model, and basically what we want to do is we want to create an attributed string. Okay, this attributed string is going to show a strike through text basically whenever the task is marked as completed, and we also want to turn it into italic, so its italic property is also gonna become true. And then if the task is not marked completed, in that case we want to basically show this as a bold task, and basically we want to just like remove all the formatting. So this is pretty simple to do. We're going to basically create an ns mutable attributed string and going to pass the name of our task. Okay, and we're going to say if the task, we're going to check first, is completed. Okay, then we're going to say take the attributed string, add attribute to this, not attributes but attribute, and we're going to basically say the key is going to be strike through style. Okay, there are various other things that you can do. For example, you can define your strike through width, color, or stroke width, stroke color, shadow, strike through color. We're gonna just set the strike through style. Okay, and the value that we're gonna basically provide, it is any type, but basically what we need is ns underline style dot single dot raw value. Okay, so it's going to be a single line that's going to be drawn on the top of the text, showing it as a strike through text. And for the range, basically we can choose to mark just few characters in the text or entire length. So we're going to basically mark the entire length as a strike through, so we can simply say ns make range from 0, which is the first index from where we want to start, to the length, and we're going to say take the length of attributed string that has been created right here. Okay, and then we're gonna simply take our task name label and set its font to UI font dot italic system font with point size 16. Okay, so basically these are like, attributed string properties that we want to set for the task that is marked completed. Now, if it is not marked completed, all we want to do is make sure that our font is basically set as 16 points and it is bold. Okay, so task name label dot font is equal to UI font dot system font of size 16 with weight bold. All right, now we have basically set the attributes for our string based on these conditions. Now let's go ahead and go to our task name label, and instead of setting its text property, which takes a simple string, we're gonna set attributed text, which takes an attributed text, and we're gonna simply pass our attributed string into that. Okay, now the next part is basically making sure our due completed label and the completed labels show the correct messaging. So that is simple. We are simply going to say due on completed label dot text is equal to, and we're going to put a ternary conditional operator here, and we're going to say if the task is completed, if it is marked already completed, just say completed on and fetch the completed property, completed on property of the model, the text view model, and format that in a way where the date is abbreviated and the time is omitted. Okay, so this is the case when we have marked the task completed, but if the task is not marked completed, meaning the ternary operator's false condition, basically task is not completed, right? In that case, we're gonna simply say show due on, and we wanna show basically let's add a colon here. Okay, and you wanna add task dot due on date, and again formatted with date as abbreviated and time as omitted. Okay, so this is gonna basically create a date string for us. So this is basically due or completed label. Now next is our completed label, and we want to set its text to task dot based on the completed state, completed if the task is marked completed, otherwise not completed. Okay, and we also want to set the text color for completed label, and we're going to say task dot completed is dot green for completed item and dot red for incomplete items. All right, with that we have actually created our first table view cell, and this is once again the repeating table view cell, which is going to display all the tasks that are there for us to do in our to-do list. Next up, we're going to create our summary table view cell. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you.